So systemic principles for governance. This comes from this book that Ray and I wrote. Or do you have to read that backwards?
No, I can read it.
No, good, fine. It's backwards to me. It's Hidden Power Systems Thinking, Governance in a Climate Emergency. And in there are 26 principles for systemic governance. And I want just to talk about one of them this evening. And that one concerns feedback. So we are talking specifically about principle 10. A fourth separation of powers should be incorporated in every system of government for the independent of feedback of results through a thing that we've called a resulture. So I was going to go through that proposal, and depending on how time flows, hopefully we will then have time to consider how and where feedback occurs now in government. And we've seen some specific examples of that from Gerald there, but more, talking more generally how that feedback occurs and how it could be developed both formally through a constitution, which is where we come from, but also from more immediate civil society means. So are there things that we can do individually and as systems thinkers and as a group in order to advance this? So feedback, why does it matter in government? Well, I was very struck a number of years ago watching a program by Jim Al-Khalili, and he was describing there the way in which humans have developed from walking on all fours to walking standing up. This occurred between 6 and 3 million years ago. So what was it? What was the process that was going on? Well, essentially, humans would walk along, and they did a computer simulation of this, would walk along, stumble, work out that, oh, actually what went wrong there, next time, I won't put one leg behind the other. I'll keep my legs parallel and so on. And through that process, which we all know as cybernetics, humans became able to walk. And in fact, if you look at all of development, wherever it is in living and lifeless organisms, organisms and organizations and so on, then they all need feedback to operate. Another example, if you take children and how they develop, well, they're like scientists, and they'll pick something up and it looks like play, but actually it's experimentation. They'll formulate explanations, test them, collect and analyze the results, and revise their worldview accordingly. And to learn is to change. As we know, feedback is knowing what has happened as a result of what has been done. Then the doing can be changed to improve the done. Or if the result is poor, then you stop doing it. We move on to the sailing metaphor, which is really the foundation for a lot of the cybernetics basis, which is if you're steering a boat, and the word in Greek for I steer or to steer is kaibaneo. There may be people with better accents for Greek than I, but something along those lines. And essentially what you're doing is you're steering this boat towards an objective. You've got a purpose, but you're getting feedback from the water and the wind the whole time. And so you're adjusting your course, and you're responding to that feedback by charting a revised course, and you're integrating that from the social and biophysical. And you're using soft technologies, which may be the rules of the ocean, and you're using hard technologies, which are the boat. So we go on from that, and we look at a very simple example of feedback and of first order cybernetics, which is the thermostat. So there you've got a thermostat on the wall. You've set it for 20 degrees Celsius. The temperature goes above 20 degrees, the thermostat turns off the boiler. It goes below 20 degrees and it turns up the boiler. Are you having any difficulties hearing me?
No.
Fine. It's absolutely rained torrentially here. But evidently the microphone is rather good at screening out the noise. Anyway, I'm sure it'll only be for a minute. This is confusing me, but perhaps not you. So there we are. You've got a thermostat. It's sensing what's going on. It takes control action depending on what's going on, and something shifts, and you get back to where you want to go. And if we take cybernetics, well, you know, what is it? I mean, it's essentially the study of communication and control through feedback. And it's that business causal change that move from action to sensing to comparison with espoused purpose and again to action. And that point about purpose is very, very important when we come on to government in a minute. So I don't think I need to persuade anyone here that feedback is fundamental to organizational success. And if you just think about personal feedback as well, and how, you know, without that, we carry on by and large doing what we do. But if you get sensitive and well-flighted feedback, then it enables you to develop. And in economic transactions, you think about going and buying something, or you buy it and very quickly, hopefully very quickly, you'll know whether what you bought does what you want it to do. And so that process there, you might well then take it back if it doesn't, or you'll certainly tell other people that this doesn't work. So that process there is fairly instant. But what happens in government? And how much feedback do we get? And, well, do we need more? And how does it need to be integrated into the system of governing so that, if you like, it has that thermostat effect, that you can have a fast response to something not working? Well, I mean, I came to this and you know, I've been one of those people that was trying to develop policies, and indeed developing policies. I was very much involved with New Labour in the 90s and 2000s. And, you know, I was a government advisor and knew 2/3 of the shadow cabinet and blah, 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 blah. So, you know, I had some place, I had some voice. Until it dawned on me that actually the way in which I was contributing was really having such a very limited effect, that actually what I was trying to contribute to this whole policy process, that really how much of this was reaching the ground, you know, how much of it was getting through to some of the issues that Gerald was talking about earlier. And I was also very much involved at the same time with Relate and the work they were doing, and seeing how much of what government was doing was connecting with Relate and so on. And I'd sat around for hours in important meetings with all sorts of lords and special advisors and MPs and ministers and civil servants and all the rest of them, but actually came to the conclusion that really this system wasn't working. And it was only much later that then, well, I wrote another book as a result of all of that, which was that one, which set out how government actually worked and indeed how government didn't work. And a principal fallacy that I think that we've identified is what we've called the end state fallacy. This notion that you can policyize something, an end state, into existence. That if you have really good policy and it's really well developed, then you can make that happen. And if you look at some of what's happened around the world, including things like housing, where after the war, there was a massive need for new housing. It was either war damaged, it was slums, and it was in various places around the world. Then what typically happened was that a policy would be developed from the center for a certain type of housing and how they were going to do that. And often, and that was by and large sort of industrial or semi-industrial housing, which was then built, and then whole communities were swept aside and put into this housing without any reference to all of those incredibly important social links and the relationships that made that community. So then those went up, and what do? You know, we created a new outlaw class. We strengthened social immobility. We created pretty poor ambiances for people who just wanted to live there, and so on and so forth. Some of this was so bad, but in Manchester, where I was at university, at the time, one of these enormous estates was going up in Hume. Came to the conclusion that actually this was a really bad idea. And so they've been demolished. I mean, so bad an idea, they've been demolished. If you go to Hume now, the sort of prairies have now been filled with streets of fairly traditional housing. If you look at the privatization of assets in the Soviet Union, off we go. This is a policy, you know, it's World Bank inspired IMF. This is what we need to do. If we privatize these state assets, all will be well. But in practice, what has happened? Well, amongst many other things, we've created this class of oligarchs, of Russian oligarchs. And you might think, well, that's a trivial matter, but that their influence really does extend quite a long way around the world. The EU, you know, often regarded as a relatively good government, done some good things. But you look, for example, now at petrol, E10 petrol that's come in using biofuels to an extent in order to reduce CO2 emissions. That's good. But where does the biomass come from? Now, if it comes from sources that are essentially benign in CO2, then that's fine. But often what happens with these policies, you get forests cut down. These are mature forests, which are really doing a damn good job at CO2. You cut those down in order to plant things like palm oil, in order to produce the biomass. I don't know, and someone needs to look, but it may well be that the E10 fuel drive is actually going to increase CO2 emissions. So, you know, there is a policy, and the idea is you can put it into practice and the end state will be produced. And in practice, every policy is an experiment. Every single policy. And if you look at neoliberal economics, that's a gigantic experiment. What we need to do about the climate is a gigantic experiment. Privatization, outsourcing, those have all been experiments. Changing the health service, that's an experiment. The school system may in some countries have been robust for years and years and years. That's great, that's fantastic. And then a big change comes along, the internet. What are you going to do now? Well, you're going to need to experiment. Welfare is an experiment, taxation is an experiment, and so on. So we came up with this acronym, PAPIAS, for the way in which government works, and then indeed the way in which politics drives government to work. And PAPIAS, so you've got a problem, you go off and analyze it, you produce a policy, then it has to be approved, then it's implemented, and away you go, you've got a solution. And of course, that process is reinforced by the political process, which offers us these solutions at election time in the form of manifestos. This is what we're going to do. And then politics, having offered us these things, then of course has to defend them. Then of course politics has to be right. Politics can't possibly be wrong. After we'd come up with this, or I'd come up with it in this case, this acronym of PAPIAS, we looked at what it actually meant in terms of, you know, what was there something in the dictionary that said, and I'm rapidly trying to find it, here we go. Well, is there something in the dictionary that PAPIAS means? And in Spanish, Miguel, you may, my pronunciation of it might be bad, but it has the meaning of daddy. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. You know, sort of government as daddy, you know, and daddy tells you what to do and daddy knows what's best. However, I then went on to the Urban Dictionary, and this may resonate with some people's experience of government in some countries, but certainly in the UK. So PAPIAS, the sexiest man in the universe, his large penis could destroy the sun, and his butthole is really a black hole. And I thought, oh my word, you know, there's quite a lot of psychological insight going on in all of this, if that's a sort of representation of government. So where do we go then? So we need feedback. Well, how on earth do you get feedback on a systematic basis? Not the sort of self-scoring stuff that we experience. Not, we've done this, this has happened, I've spun the statistics, you know, all is well, I'll go on breakfast time TV and I'll blag my way through, you know, this is really, really impressive, isn't it wonderful? Not feedback in the sense that sort of gathers everything together, and at election time, we're sort of allowed to decide whether, you know, taking this thing in the round, this is a bit better than this thing. That's absurd. But feedback that really nails everyone in government's attention to results. And people may have better ideas than us, but it seemed to us that what we needed was, in terms of the system of governing, as a fourth separation of powers. So governments generally, and this doesn't pertain totally, or it doesn't pertain universally through every government, but broadly, you've got the executive, which is the government, you've got the legislature, which are the lawmakers, and you've got the judiciary, the judges, who decide if the rules have been applied or not. And we've said we need a full separation of powers. And so what's this thing going to be called? Well, the best name that we've come up with is a Resulture. If anyone's got a better name, then, you know, sort of do let us know. And where would that Resulture sit? You know, how do you create this independence? Well, it's, as I said about results, you know, maths aren't a matter of politics. And that's a bit of a sweeping statement, and it's simplistic, I appreciate, but essentially I think you'll take the point. So it needs to be separate from the political process. Well, where can we find something that's separate from the political process? Well, if you have a properly constituted upper house, a second chamber. In the UK, it's called the House of Lords, unfortunately. But if you have a properly constituted second chamber, which it is genuinely separate, but also, interestingly, I think, separate from politics, then that's the place to put the Resulture. You might, and I don't want to dwell on this too much at present now, but you might then contemplate, well, who's going to be in that Resulture? Who is going to be in that upper house? And there's a lot of debate from time to time about, it should be voted in on proportional representation, or there should be, regional representation, or there should be, and these forms happen in various countries, or it should be composed of mayors of municipalities and so on and so forth. But actually, what's the job? Well, the role surely is the vetting and the check and balance, not of the politics of the government, but what they're trying to do. And in many respects, I do wonder, therefore, if the standard election through a political process and political parties is actually the last thing that we want. And some form of appointments commission, which might be based on a citizens' assembly, but some form which brings together a broad spectrum of people. And there would be a very large number of systems thinkers in my model. Engineers, I don't know, representatives of the Girl Guides, some of the people that Gerald was talking about earlier on, business people and so on and so forth. But a collection of people, interestingly, not too dissimilar, but an awful lot younger and an awful lot smaller than the current House of Lords in the UK. A collection of people who are there to make this thing work. It's their job then to cohere all of this feedback information, some of which exists, but also then to put it into a process that ensures that action happens. So how might that be? And it's interesting just at this point to refer to Peter Drucker, who wrote a very good booklet in 1969, where he talked about the need for abandonment powers. So governments accumulate and they hardly ever stop anything. There have been 3,500 pieces of legislation in the reign of Queen Elizabeth II. How many of them are useful? How many of them are working? How many of them are effective? I mean, thousands and thousands of regulations. And at this point, I wanted to introduce this. I don't know whether you can see that. Everyone? Well, actually, this is a UK thing. But for people outside the UK, on our plugs when we buy them, this goes on to the 3-pin plug in order to protect it. And then you say, well, so what's it protecting it from? It's already packaged up. I mean, is this actually to stop children picking the new device up and plug it in straight into a socket? Well, what was the purpose of this? And the only purpose I can think, it's some kind of safety device. And let's say, for the sake of argument, because I'm not sure that anyone actually knows why this thing is produced, how many people have actually, stopped electrocuting themselves as a result of this thing? How much safety has it actually produced? And is that worth, I don't know how many tens, hundreds, millions of these things have been produced because of some regulation of what cost, and at what cost this is plastic to the biosphere. But it seems to me that would be quite an important thing to know. And of course, this is trivial. If you writ that large across government and writ that large across the impact of the accumulation of those things on us, then you're sort of beginning to get into what I call Joseph Tainter territory. And he's a guy, and he's on an IFRS seminar coming up, I think, who wrote The Collapse of Complex Societies. And I mean, to not do justice to his book, but to put it very simply, his thesis is that, you know, for example, why did the Roman Empire collapse? You know, well, it was a bunch of Visigoths, wasn't it? You know, these sort of barbarians that came down from Germany and sort of laid them to waste. But why on earth was the Roman Empire so weak that it couldn't repulse a few barbarians dressed in loincloths? You know, what on earth was going on? His point was that the Roman Empire had become so complex, so gummed up with bureaucracy, so gummed up with laws and regulations and all the rest, and institutions which had passed their sell-by date, that really it found it very difficult to move, and particularly very difficult to move quickly. And the marginal cost to get any form of real improvement on the ground was just enormous. Consequently, it collapsed. And I think that the same I can see happening here, where our governments get so sort of egg-bound and so tied up that actually getting any improvement from the center downwards becomes very, very hard. So I think we need feedback. I think we need a resulture. That has to go in the Constitution. And I appreciate we don't really have one in the UK, but other countries that are represented on this call fortunately do, and might find this an easier concept to think about implementing. And I think it's also worth saying that I haven't, although some countries respond better than others to the feedback that they get now and are more interested in learning about what's going on outside, nevertheless, there is no country in the world that has consistent, comprehensive, independent feedback. So then we go on and say, well, okay, so there you are. You've got all of this feedback. That's jolly good. You know, what are you going to do with it? Well, the first thing is that there have to be powers of abandonment, that if a regulation or an institution or a law isn't working, then why the hell have we got it? Those response times, and of course you do get reactions from the press, you do get public campaigns, you do get public campaigns, which after years and years and years sometimes manage to get something changed. But I mean, the flash to bang time is just enormous. And what we need is as rapid a feedback as we can have, bearing in mind, of course, particularly if the changes have been systemic, then things will take time to unfold. But of course, that's another systems thinking concept, is you don't wait till it's finished. You don't wait till the end point. You embed the feedback in the process of implementation. So you're constantly doing that course correction, and the way in which you go about your policy experiments, or as Ray defined them, I think much better term is designs for action. When you're putting those designs into action, you're getting that feedback all the time, so you make those course corrections. Now, once we've got results working away, what benefit will we get? Well, yeah, there's the abandonment program for a kickoff, the simplification program, the focus program. Let's do, one thing really, really well rather than attempting to do 200 things in a moderate to bad way. Less is undoubtedly more in government. But you'd also get politicians, and I think you'd attract possibly the wrong word, but you would draw in politicians that are much more focused on why we elect them, which is we elect them to actually get something done. We don't elect them to keep us happy, or as one said to me, the job of a politician is to give the electorate hope. And I thought, well, what the hell do I do with hope? I can't get into a hospital at present. What use is hope to me? And of course, Greta Thunberg was on, there are 3 programs that about her, they followed her around for a year or two. And she said, hope springs from action. So we would have politicians who are focused, and we would sort of end this charade of, politics being focused on the 24-hour news media, being focused on initiatives, being focused on photo shoots, being focused on announceables, and all these absolutely trivial and marginal aspects of why they're there. I think we would then find that, if you're looking really hard at, well, what did happen to this public education campaign? What is the effect of this basket of taxes? What is the effect of the contracts with the private sector and the transfer assets from civil society? The way in which the water is now managed, I appreciate it's a UK point, but is now managed and controlled. Has that had in total beneficial effects? So you get this engine that focuses political minds in a different way. It also focuses our minds because, we all have our prejudices, we all have our gut instincts, we all have shock horror, that's a scandal. But here is this reality check, if you like, this mechanism that's bringing us back to the ground, I guess, is the point. So that's broadly, just looking at the time, that's broadly what we're proposing. I'm very interested to hear, it's a truncated version, obviously, to hear whether people feel that there is sufficient feedback now in government, whether people feel that, how can I put it, that, I'm sort of going over the top here. And then particularly, what is it that we can do locally if, and within our networks and our groups in order to produce feedback?
Ed, thank you. That's very thought-provoking, to say the absolute least. I'm going to, given that we've got a maximum of 15 minutes for questions, can I ask people to follow the same process that we did for Gerald, in that people, if they have a question, rather than trying to put their hand up with lots and lots of screens on Zoom, type your question into chat. That way Ed can see it and respond to it in a reasonably fair way. Patrick, you have a queue.
In a way, it's less a queue and more in a sort of bridge and an agreement. I think the stopping doing stuff is and the power of that is much misunderstood. I once did some work in an association of local authorities, so it was a sort of complex of I think about 9 different local authorities in a city that shall remain nameless, and they had a number of cross boundaries. This is the bridge to Gerald's. They had a number of cross boundary groups, and we found one boundary that had 23 forums stacked on top of the same cross-boundary problem. And of course, what you've got is, we need an initiative to solve this problem and it doesn't work. So you put another group on top of it, and then another group on top of it, another group on top of it. And if you don't decommission the first one, none of the rest can work. So, I mean, I think it's and they all contribute to the, what you called eggbound, that systemic constraint that we build in all the time. And the stripping out, I think, is the importance of that is massively underestimated. I think it's a huge thing, Ed.
Yeah, and sorry, I think it's Becky, but apologies if I've got this wrong, but someone's mentioned targets and KPIs, and of course, all targets are arbitrary, and the whole regime, where this is what we're going to do. It's top down, it's centrally driven, it's linear, it's causal. Now we're going to stick a target on it. Now we're going to have some KPIs. And then it drives so often aberrant behavior. And some of the simplification would
yes, I am fine. I'm on a very, very boring.
John F. Evans is in a very boring session. I apologize, John. You must go and play your guitar now. Have I sent him away? You didn't see that earlier in your session, Gerald. It's not just me. Yeah. So all of that technology, technical artifacts of the way governments attempt to do now would get stripped out. So yeah, if someone was concerned anyway about KPIs, and yeah, KPIs, I mean, there are measures, we all know that. There are measures of system performance. I mean, that's what we're concerned about. And we're concerned about those measures of system performance against purpose. And if we think about, and that will be something else that would focus politicians' minds, why are you doing this? I'm trying to think of an example that's just, current, but it's like, we have driving licenses, for example, which are actually issued pretty efficiently and effectively and quickly. But what's the purpose of a driving license? If we go behind that immediate bureaucratic purpose, well done, it's very simple, it's replicable and so on. If we come, to the examples that Gerald was talking about earlier, and these immensely complex, here's a good one. Adult social care has been big in the news here, and is big in the news across all developed countries. There's a complex of people getting, well, living longer, terrific, but actually living longer and getting bad health, not terrific. Pensions, and how is that all stacking up? What are we going to take out of your assets, and so on and so forth? Well, the government here has just decided it's going to do something. To be perfectly honest, I'm not even sure what it is. I hope they know, but I do wonder. And they're going to do it uniformly across England, Wales, Scotland, and probably Northern Ireland. Well, what an opportunity to experiment. This is a really tough nut to crack. At least let England, Wales, Scotland, and preferably parts of England, experiment with this and see where we go. Sorry, another question.
Can I ask a question, please?
Please do.
I think your idea of a consulture is an excellent idea. I put in the chat. But
thank you.
To get requisite variety of feedback, would you agree that it needs to be done for every public organization, for every stakeholder group, and that the power should be divided between those who manage and those who govern, so that the feedback, the voices of stakeholders can be heard independently of those responsible for creating the problems? And the other question is, do you know anybody in the world that teaches how to design corporate constitutions to that end?
In terms of the latter question, I mean, there are people around doing interesting work. Our head Cliffart has done some very interesting work on the forms of democracy, and there are others, but as a generality, I've not come across anyone in terms of the operations of government that has come up with this. And if you're designing a constitution, for God's sake, don't go anywhere near a lawyer, because
I agree. But do you know anybody that teaches that? Is it an intellectual black hole of all our education system of designing constitutions consistent with system practice?
Absolutely. I mean, so far as I'm aware, and others on the call that I can see would have a better knowledge than me, but we, with Bob Garrett and someone else,
he's top down. I know Bob, he's top down.
Okay.
You have a single board. He's committed to a single board with absolute power to absolutely corrupt the individuals, the organization, and society.
Okay. I did try some time ago to get a course going at City Business School because I had an entree there, and it was the governance of government. And so far, you're absolutely right, Sean. So far as I'm aware, Shan, there is an immense black hole here. In terms of your previous question, I agree that the job of the Resulture is to cohere all of the feedback, because I mean, I know, academics all the time are working in various ways, producing various small bits and large bits of feedback, and this, it gets published. There's a bit of a interest, applause, and all the rest of it, and then it's left lying there.
As soon as you cohere it, you then marginalize the minor voices, like Gerald was talking about. You need every stakeholder to have its voice.
I agree entirely. One of the ways in which we put in the book, for example, in terms of feedback on a school, there was a very effective a process called Progress, which was basically took all of the stakeholders. So it took the parents, it took the children, it took the community, it took the teachers, it took the management, and a very carefully and well-flighted and well-designed survey, completely anonymous, confidential, and all the rest of it. Took that feedback, and the clever thing that the guy did who was running it was then to, if you like, mediate that feedback into the school in a non-threatening way. And to essentially, I mean, it was a communication device. Did you know the children thought that? Did you know the teachers, some of the teachers, do you know the, you start to talk, you get a conversation going. And to cut a long story short, the results improve. There's a surprise. But yes, I mean, I agree.
It's a great start, but it doesn't put it in the constitution of the school like they do in Mondragon, where the students and the teachers are on the supervisory board, the power to act, not just the information to act.
Yes.
And so all this, I mean, it's like VSM. It's at the grace and favor of management. It's not hardwired into the constitution.
No, I mean, if you get a chance to have a look at our book, I mean, I'm absolutely into hardwiring things. If you give 11 people the rules for playing football, they'll play football. If you give people the rules for playing cricket, they'll play cricket. And the rule book for politics and politicians and government needs to be changed. And that rule book is the Constitution. So I'm just conscious of time. Have we time for any more? Johnny Evans has apologized. He was referring to a boring dispute with his local authority over a blue badge. If we believe him. Robin, please say.
We have one question. We have one hand raised for a while, and that's Michael. And I'd quite like to fit that time in. I'm conscious we're a little short, so hopefully, Michael, it's something that I can get to. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Tony. Hi, Ed.
Hi, Michael.
Unfortunately, how could it be a short question with a presentation like that? But you know, I wish I was with you, and clearly feedback is essential. But once you transfer it from mechanical organisms to purposeful systems, it becomes so much more complicated, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And my concern is that the feedback would be interpreted by different groups according to existing worldviews. And the result is that it would add to the political game and the media frenzy, rather than helping us to get more in touch with reality, as you put it. Now, I know there are ways of avoiding that, which might be to specify a policy incredibly tightly in advance. But I even wonder whether that's a good idea. I don't think it is, actually, not in terms of your experimental approach.
No. And indeed, I mean, it was another point I was going to raise. It's, I think, one of the, you know, over the years, policy, if we only have better and better and better policy, then all will be well, you know, and we need to get away from policy-based, what do we call it? Policy-based evidence to evidence-based policy. And you know, I've been one of the people that have said that over the years. But actually, it's the whole thing is flawed, as you say. You know, it's this notion that we can policyize an end state into existence, and you know, the unexpected consequences of all of this are definitely need to be thought about. But I mean, bear in mind, there are another 25 principles of systemic governance that go with this one. So, and I'd say that in relation to the Constitution as well. So there are a hell of a lot of other building blocks and sort of, you know, defenses against the narcissistic psychopaths that, you know, generally seem to come to the top of governments in many parts of the world anyway. So yeah, there's a lot more to it.
Folks, I'm very conscious that we are at 8:29 Greenwich Mean Time, which is a minute from when we said we were going to finish. So at this point, I think I need to firstly ask a question. Ed, is this red, amber, green?
It's green.
Okay, thank you.